online, and we do have a quorum just, which is a relief. So without further ado, we'll get underway. I see Benita is there online from, well, it looks like a freezing cold Manaia this time. Is anyone else online? Okay, do we have any, what are the apologies today?
So we have got apologies from Councillor Philby, from STDC, Councillor McIntyre, Councillor Walker, Emily and Peter as well. Well, not officially, no.
Not officially.
We've got unofficial apologies.
People don't
from
give official apologies. We're not going to
fair
assumptions. People need to advise us.
They do. Okay. So the first item is. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'll make the apologies. Those in favour, please say aye. Okay. Item number 3 is the confirmation of minutes.
I'm happy to move.
Thank you very much.
Happy to say.
Thanks, Charlotte. Are there anything anyone wishes to raise? Yes, there isn't. So we have a mover and a second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
There are none. Item number 4, improving timelines of jury trials. Submissions, page 7. Who's going to speak? Finbar.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, we have a short, very short submission for you here today.
One pager.
Yeah.
First time I've seen one of
those. So the government currently is consulting on potential changes to the threshold for when jury trial is an option for prosecutions. The rationale here is that processes and timelines and things in the district court are pretty slow, and it's getting worse over time. So they're looking to kind of free up some of that resource by basically meaning that for a bunch of things, jury trials will not be an option because they take a lot more time and a lot more resources. They're consulting on 4 different options. Status quo, which is anything which carries a potential imprisonment of 2 years is eligible for a jury trial. That's what we currently have. They're exploring options of 3, 5, or 7 years. So we're proposing to submit supporting that threshold being lifted to 3 years. The practical implication for us is that that means the vast majority of prosecutions under the RMA would not be eligible for a jury trial because they carry a maximum term of imprisonment of 2 years. And that's the crux of it. Our experience has been that jury trials are a significant greater expenditure of resources, and that a lot of that goes on the, the time and the extra complexity of communicating really complicated RMA things to a jury, as opposed to being able to have that communicated directly to a judge, where it's a bit easier. But I'll leave it there and happy to take any questions.
What a surprise, Susan.
Why aren't we submitting that RMA prosecution should be exempt from jury trials?
That's a good question. My initial reflection would be, we were just looking at the options.
I appreciate that they have funneled you into that option, but isn't the obvious position to take that matters that touch on the RMA should not be a jury trial? Because in fact, 12 good people and true will never have a clue nor an interest in effluent discharges and all the rest of it. They totally get bashing, stealing, killing. They get that, but they do not get the RMA stuff. It's a monstrous waste of time and incredibly inefficient.
I'm comfortable supporting that if officers think that that's
So would you like to put a motion to add that to submissions?
Yes, I would like to move that we should be responding to the Crown proposal by inviting the Crown to consider an exemption for RMA matters, that they are not eligible for jury trial.
I'll second that.
Okay, thanks, Donna.
Through you, Chair, would you be comfortable in that submission noting, and if that is not an option, we also support 3 years?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Great.
I mean, you need a plan B.
Yeah.
Because my plan A is probably going to be unattractive, but I mean, it is the obvious and the most practical way to, in fact, deal with the matter. And it doesn't, this level playing field does not recognise the speciality that Resource Management Act brings.
So I just wonder what your thoughts were, Fred.
Choose you, Chair, absolutely support.
Thanks. Susan.
You, Chair, just questions actually for Susan. Why is it you think they haven't proposed that? There must be an underlying reason.
I just
Oh,
think
right.
everybody takes the easy route because the triggering point for eligibility for a jury trial is 2 years.
Yep.
So, you know, that covers lots of minor offences and all the rest of it. So by moving that bar, you knock out a whole bunch of minor thefts or minor assaults that would otherwise get before the court. And I don't think anybody actually thinks about RMA prosecutions actually making it to trial.
Through you, Chair, I would suspect in this case, MOJ probably never even thought about the RMA introducing this consultation document. One, it is something that the Crown is aware of, though. So in the now defunct Natural Built Environment Act, that proposed a bunch of changes to including compliance under the RMA existing, including dropping the imprisonment maximum to 18 months, so it would fall below the threshold of a jury trial as well. So it is MFE and the like are aware of the issue, and that it's something that I assume that they would probably be looking at.
And I wouldn't support the reduction in the penalty because people who breach the RMA, who find themselves being imprisoned, have been pretty persistent or done something really terrible. So we need to have a penalty that truly bites. So I think it's the wrong way to go to drop the penalty.
Okay, so we have the recommendations on page 7. Thank you for that, Susan, and others. So what do we have to do here? How about B, we endorse the submission contained, and appendix 1 subject to the changes as discussed. Happy with that? Okay. Move on. Lead on. Second up.
So what was it in the end?
So we've already got we're endorsing the submission subject to the changes that Susan has motioned.
To exclude RMA.
Yeah.
I'm happy to propose, Leland, if you don't want to.
What's that?
I'm happy to propose it if you.
I'm just concerned that it might mean that they're going to have more prosecutions under the RMA.
No,
It's
it won't make
suddenly easier to do it. That's all. That's my only concern.
it absolutely wouldn't make any difference there. The practical reality is if you find yourself before the court for anything that has a maximum penalty of 2 years or greater, you can choose to go to a jury trial. And I've certainly, and I'm sure Fred must have seen this too, seen defendants make that choice knowing full well that it spins it out, makes it more difficult, more complicated, and you're likely to get 12 bored people listening to a dairy effluent case, paying no attention at all, who just do not think it's a big deal, as opposed to a specialist RMA judge who will totally understand the issues.
I have sat on a jury and it's a hell of a thing to do. So, yeah, no,
So
I'm
there are
happy with it.
specialist judges.
Well, that's who hears all the RMA things. They're environment court judges. So this is their bread and butter. It's a specialist court. It's like the Māori Land Court or something else like that, that if you've got a specialist judge, then you need to have some confidence in them understanding context. And what have you, 12 good people in True do not care necessarily.
You know, I'm happy with it.
You're happy to move?
I'm happy with it.
Thanks, Doc. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, up there, and none. All right, next up, we have freshwater. We have Crown Minerals Amendment Bill number 5.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So this, you might have seen in the media, it was a period of submissions that was very short. I think it was about 4 working days from when Select Committee opened for submissions and then closed. So the submission was prepared with some haste. what the government is seeking to do in this bill, the headline thing is the repeal of the exploration ban. However, the government has also proposed a number of other changes to kind of shore up investment, etc. Two key ones here the ones that we focus in on our submissions are the proposal to begin a government policy statement for Crown Minerals. So this is a way that the government to say basically what they want to achieve under the Crown Minerals Act. This is similar to what already exists under the Land Transport Act, where the government issues a policy statement and it directs a whole lot of people on what happens. And related to that one actually is a restoring of the purpose of the Crown Minerals Act, that the Crown is to promote the use of those minerals. The former government changed that promote to manage. And then finally, the other quite significant change is a change to the liability provisions under the Crown Minerals Act, particularly with an eye to what happens post decommissioning of a well. So our submission is quite to the point. On the matters around the government policy statement, we support that, saying that would be quite useful to have that direction. However, we proposed some amendments to essentially drawing on what the process is for the land transport one, which is you need to give regard to relevant national direction on the RMA. So you're not issuing a policy direction that doesn't quite match with what the regulation requires. And also that it would be nice to have some consultation in the preparation of that document. So councils like Taranaki can input into what that might be. With regards to liability, we primarily just expressed caution that the government needs to be careful in changes to liability because it can lead to quite significant implications, and also being very clear that in the event that those companies aren't there, that the ultimate liability rests with the Crown, not the local communities here in Taranaki, and they're not left to foot the bill. And finally, I'd note in terms of what we covered in our submission, we made a deliberate decision to focus on things where we think there might actually be a chance of influencing the government's policy direction. Oh, sorry, I should also say submissions are closed and select committees already had the public consultations, opportunities to speak to your submission, sorry. And the government hopes to have the bill passed by the end of the year.
Some of the things that we're submitting on, or the points that we've made, Finbar, like liability and things like that, when it comes to oil and gas, we would probably likely be the only ones submitting on those aspects because we're the only region that has oil and gas.
Quite possibly. There were some submissions from industry with regards to the liability provisions, I understand.
Okay.
But I don't think there would be any probably councils or people from our kind of regulatory position making that kind of submission. But I would have to go back and check to be sure.
So years there's been drilling in other parts of New Zealand, not just Taranaki. So those well liability issues exist all around New Zealand. But most of the drilling for oil and gas has been here.
So did we garner support from other councils, or do we know what others have submitted? They've submitted along the same lines?
We don't know, but yeah, I can't answer that.
Yeah.
But that our position is strong, that the community shouldn't inherit any liability that exists.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. So long as we listen. Anybody else want to comment on this? No, we're off the hook. Can I have a move on for the recommendations? Susan, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? There are none. Okay, so fresh water. Lisa.
Well, the first paper that I'll present today is just the general update that we give every 6 weeks. You'll note it's a pretty light paper today because most of the things I want to take you through is actually the next item, which is a conversation around the feedback we had from consultation. But in the update paper, probably just a key thing to draw your attention to from paragraph 8 onwards was we have had the select committee report be released on the RMA Amendment Bill 1, which was freshwater and other matters. I'll take most of that as read. Pretty much the select committee continued with or provided recommendations along the lines of what the government had without consultation, but there are some amendments and some nuance, I guess, with some of the things that they have suggested there. One thing I will draw your attention to, though, is although it wasn't part of the bill when it was consulted on, the Select Committee report has made recommendations to Parliament around amending Section 107 of the RMA. So you might recall previous conversations we've had around some High Court decisions down in ECAN around the ability for councils to grant discharge consents when there's a significant adverse effect occurring. So what this amendment has done is it enables that High Court decision, I guess, kind of really put into question whether councils could actually grant those discharge consents when there was a significant adverse effect occurring. Section 107 has the amendments that the Select Committee are proposing will enable councils to grant those discharge consents, but where there's certain things in place, and one of those things being that there's consent conditions being put on those consents, and that there's confidence that those consent conditions will seek improvement so that that significant adverse effect is no longer occurring through the end of that consent duration. So it's a pretty significant change to come in. So we'll see how that goes through the second reading of that bill. They haven't yet made amendments or suggestions to change Section 70 of the Act, which is the other part of those High Court decisions between Environment Southland and Environment Canterbury. And Section 70 relates to how we can write method rules relating to effects from discharges. We do expect, though, that there might be amendments to Section 70 come through the next amendment bill for the RMA that the government's going to be consulting on shortly. So you're happy to take any questions on the update memo? Otherwise, it's read.
I do have a question through, Chair.
Sure.
I'm just wondering what it is that it says around freshwater farm plans that we're sitting in the status quo. Can you just remind me exactly what status quo is?
So the government have made the announcement that they will be pausing the freshwater farm plans because they're going to review the regulations. That hasn't come into effect yet, that pause, because there obviously were some regions that had already started under those regulations. My understanding is that they'll be bringing that formal pause into that next round of RMA amendments. But for us, because we weren't a region that had been turned on yet, we've paused work, I guess, on what those freshwater farm plans work would have been, which was things like preparing the CCCV catchment context values statements, the rollout that we had planned around how we might move around the region to implement freshwater farm plans. All of that work's on hold at the moment until we get further information and direction from the government.
Okay, cool. So it's definitely just sitting there.
Yeah, we are. I will say, and I'll touch on it in our in the update on the consultation report. We are still looking, though, through the policy lens of how we might be able to draft our new plan to embed the freshwater farm plan regulations, so that where we've got confidence that things might be able to deal with through that process and not a consenting process, we're still looking at ways because the government has committed that they will be a thing, freshwater farm plans. And their main reason for that is they want to reduce the consenting burden for people. So we are still investigating ways that, as we're drafting the policy, that we're keeping, I guess, an eye open onto what those opportunities might be. But we do need to wait for the government to give us a bit more direction on exactly what amendments they might make to those regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the recommendation is there to receive the update, page 78. And those Charlotte?
Yep.
Charlotte. All those in favour, please. Aye. Right. So item number 7, we have feedback and next steps.
Or are you going to click through for me? That's okay. So I have got a presentation to take you through on this item. Effectively, this item is we've brought back to you the analysis work that the team's done on the submissions that and feedback that we received during the freshwater consultation. So I'm going to take you through, I guess, mainly the next steps I'll take, because the memo itself has summarised, I guess, what each of the feedback was under each of those key themes. So I'm not going to go through that, but I'm more than happy if any members got questions specifically about a theme. But I thought it was quite important to take you through to the next steps and identify, and in doing that, I'll identify some of the key feedback that we received, and particularly where there might be some difference of views coming through from our community. So you do have the full slide pack though in your in Diligent. So if you do want me to refer to any particular slide, I can flip back and have a look at that. One thing just to note though too is that slide pack does focus on the particularly focus on the quantitative analysis of feedback that we got, and I will just urge everybody that there's a lot of the detail of this report is really where the value comes from it. So it's not necessarily always a numbers game of certain proposals being preferred by the community. Actually, what they said about their preference or not is really important for us as to guide our policy and science work going forward. So just remind us of what we were doing and why. We undertook the consultation work from for a couple of months, from June through to August, and that was focused on the draft target attribute states for nutrients, sediment, E. coli, and then our water allocation, and then also proposed management approaches as to how we might need to draft policies to enable us to reach those target attribute states. And then the how, there was a range of ways that we obviously met with the community on this. There's online surveys, community roadshows, ran a series of Tangata Whenua workshops. There were special interest groups with key industry areas, and then obviously bespoke submissions were also received. Just a quick overview again on the quick stats of what we actually got back. And it's fair to say we got a lot of feedback, really high quality feedback from our community in Tangata Whenua, and I think that shows that people are quite engaged in this topic. And so it's keen, I guess we're kind of keen to keep that momentum going with our community. But we had 230 surveys completed. We held 16 roadshows with around 550 people in attendance. There's a whole heap of, for any of you that were able to attend those, you would have seen the amount of feedback we received during those roadshow events. 7 hui with Tangata Whenua, with approximately 70 people in attendance across those hui. And we held those in different kinds of formats. Some of those were held in that roadshow kind of style where the whānau were able to come in and drop in as pleased them, and others were kind of more on a presentation, feedback, discussion kind of style. There was a lot of hits on our Have Your Say website. We did a lot of radio advertising, so we reached a whole range of people, I guess, to let them know that the consultation is happening, which I think is reflected in the numbers that we actually got in return. So I will take you through a few general feedback. So there was obviously feedback specific to each of the things we consulted on, but throughout that feedback, there was also some general themes that just kind of came through in almost every area. So I will take you through some of the key ones there. There were some real mixed views on the timeframes that we set out to make improvements. So most of our target attribute states set out to look at around about the 30-year timeframe, pushing out to when we might be able to achieve some of those target attribute states. We did have some real mixed views on that. Parts of our community were concerned that this was going to take much longer than 30 years to reach some of those target attribute states, and if we push too hard and too fast, we'd be adding cost and financial burden to people, whereas others were saying, actually, we can't wait 30 years. Some of the environmental challenges we're facing need to be addressed earlier than that, and that was particularly quite a strong view expressed by Tangata Whenua as well. And I think there's a key thing just to note, because you'll see in the next steps when I come back to what the next science work we're doing, we are looking into what other mitigations and actions we might be able to take through some of our science work to see whether we have got those targets and those timeframes about right, or whether there are ways that we might be able to push a little bit harder, or whether we need to review where we're sitting on those. There was general comments around freshwater values and character, and this is really, I guess, a desire from the community, and particularly Tangata Whenua, to where we can to really look through the lens of catchment-based work, to really make sure that where we are might be applying a region-wide rule framework, that we provide the opportunity for those individual characteristics of waterways to come to the fore in that. And I think it's quite important here that that might not always be something we can achieve through a regulatory framework, but it can be something we should be thinking about through a non-regulatory framework as well, in terms of how we support community and Tangata Whenua to be operating in that catchment space together. Monitoring sites and data availability. There was criticism, I guess, on that some of our monitoring coverage needs to be improved, and that's probably particularly relevant, I think, for some of our hill country areas. And that's something we've noted, and that is a next step I'll cover off on. The plan review process, not surprising, I guess we did get a lot of views, particularly from industry groups around questioning why the council's continuing on with their freshwater plan review when the government signalled that there's changes coming. So I guess that's just an encouragement from those kind of groups for us to take additional time and to relook at our program as more work comes through from the government, which we will be doing, and that's what our, the resolution that you guys gave us earlier in the year kind of said, that when we know more from government, we will have a look and stop and we'll see whether that does have an impact on our planning program. Climate change generally was something that was flagged across all of the options too, and this ranged from maybe some of the work we have been doing around climate change predictions and building that into our science. We perhaps weren't as we didn't present it as clearly as perhaps we could have. So there were some assumptions that we actually haven't been doing that work, and we have been. So that's probably a note for us as the council to make sure we bring that work to the fore more. But also there was general concern, I guess, from the community around some of the land uses that Taranaki has, I guess, have an over-reliance on things like export markets. And if we're continuing to focus on those and not providing an opportunity for diversification, and now we're embedding practice that is causing some of the concerns we've seen with climate change. Our farming community in particular flagged as well, they're concerned that they're going to be asked to address the environmental impacts that are caused by climate change. So they're concerned that a lot's going to rest on their shoulders, whereas actually it's more of a community response that is required. And then the last point there is just a reminder, I guess, that came through quite strongly from Tangata Whenua and some government agencies as well, which is we need to keep in mind the holistic nature of freshwater improvements. So it's not only about, I guess, the environmental improvements that we see, but if we can achieve environmental improvements, and that has benefits for our community and our economy and all of those things. So an important reminder, I guess, for us to keep as we keep working through. So I'm going to skip through. Does anyone have any questions on those? Because otherwise I'll skip through to the next steps and
Later.
I just have most more comment, if I may. And that's the thing around the reliance on export markets and the need to diversify. Even if we diversify, those diversifications still need a market, and that market will most likely be an export market. I just think that that's a really perhaps naive understanding of how economics works. Sorry, that's it.
Yeah, it's just commentary, I guess, we've received from community around Taranaki's role, I suppose, in New Zealand's export. And that's why some of that economic report that we had done as well, was the vulnerability, I think, a little bit too, from that perspective for Taranaki, that we are quite reliant on a couple of land uses in particular. So we need to be mindful of that, I suppose, when we're working through environmental policies. So next steps, we've kind of bundled the next steps into 3 buckets, one being around what we're going to do in terms of next steps for engagement and collaboration. The next steps being around policy direction. So we feel we have received some pretty clear direction in some areas from our community for us to continue on down a certain pathway of some policy development. So I'll set those out for you. And then next steps on science investigation. So there's a whole heap of work that we need to continue to do to support our policy development. So engagement and collaboration. We obviously will continue to work with Tangata Whenua on how our future plan starts to shape up. There's some key areas of development, though, I think that we will be focusing on, and that's around how does our plan incorporate and where is it appropriate to incorporate Mātauranga Māori, and also partly with that is what do we need to do as a council to support a stronger understanding and support our relationship with iwi around Mātauranga Māori, and bringing that into the policy framework. Making a kai, it's currently a compulsory value through the current MPS, and so we're keen to make sure that we continue that work. It's a pretty important Māori freshwater value that provides a lot of opportunity, I guess, to seek improvement. And fish passage is another key one that particularly came through when talking with iwi and hapu around their desire to be really involved in the work that's happening at a catchment level around fish passage improvements as well. There's one thing I would say too, I think on reflection of the feedback that we did receive in the conversations we had with Tangata Whenua, was there's a really strong desire, I think, for a greater connection to Whenua and on the ground connections with community from iwi and hapu, and some of that will find its place into a regulatory framework like a freshwater plan, and some of that is also going to need to be supported in a non-regulatory way. So supporting, we already know TCC do a lot of great work in that space, supporting them to continue to do that work, supporting TRC and continue to do that non-regulatory work in, encouraging and supporting EB to be involved on the ground when it comes to freshwater management. So we're aware of that, and I'm just flagging that as we're drafting up a regulatory framework, we're conscious of those non-regulatory things that we might need to bring into play as well.
I'll just make a comment.
Yeah, question.
Lisa. And it's probably more for everyone's understanding. The use of Mātauranga Māori and Mahina Kai values was really integral and critical to the remediation New Zealand case that we've recently been through, as well as the discharge of effluent or sewage into our river. So those two key aspects have really proved useful for us to be able to demonstrate the overall impact from a cultural lens. So still being able to continue working with regional council, see how that can be embedded is quite
What,
Yes.
what do you see those big, obviously effluent to water, but what other things, or do you think through the plan that these things will naturally come to?
So one of the things that we utilised was a specific model to test. So while we have a Western science approach to gathering evidence, we also have a Mātauranga Māori approach. And we use what's called a Māori compass. And the Māori compass looks at different indicators that Western science would generally look at and uses a cultural lens in order to understand the health and the quantity or quality of the water.
So it's looking at like the ecology more.
Yeah, but from a cultural lens, from Mātauranga Māori.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It'd be great to have
one
a
of the indicators
presentation.
that we use is tuna, is eels. So our team will go out and catch eels and then assess the health of the eels to get an understanding of the health of the water. Whereas in Western science, that probably isn't.
Go a bit further. What kind of health? Or is this going too far?
It's probably getting into a bit of detail.
We had a presentation on the Māori compass a while back,
Yeah.
so there's an existing slideshow that goes through what it did. So maybe we could circulate that.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
and the point really is just to explain that there is real value in including Mātauranga Māori and Mahina Kai. And we've demonstrated that through those two particular projects that I mentioned.
The council also supported EB to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Stepping through, next bit is we've got some work to do with our district councils, particularly in the space of stormwater and wastewater networks. I will just make a note here too that the government recently has announced some changes, pending changes to the Water Services Act bill around things like a standard wastewater standards that might apply across the whole country. So we're going to have to be mindful of whatever might come down from us from central government in that space as to what role the freshwater plan still may have to play. Some of that work may be taken from us and delivered through central government direction. But we want to really sit down with the district councils to talk about how some of our policy approaches particularly impact them in implementation side of things. Generally, the community were quite supportive of us taking a stronger, more stringent approach to wastewater and stormwater discharges, but our district councils did express some concern because of the impacts that might have on them being able to deliver their services and the cost timeframe and transition kind of element. So they're the things that we need to sit down with our district councils to get a better handle on to see what that looks like for Taranaki. There's obviously work going on between all of our districts with iwi involved at the moment too around what those new regulations might look like under the Water Services Bill. So that's an opportunity for us to tap into that group and just have some really good conversations around what the impacts might be of what we might want to put in our freshwater plan for our districts. Yep.
So will we get a report on that? Because that's quite a big one, isn't it?
It is.
Would that be?
Yep. All of these things that I'm taking you through will come back through this committee when we've kind of landed some clear options that we want to test with you all. So that will be one. I suspect that's probably one that we're probably going to spend the rest of this year having those conversations with districts and also waiting a little bit to see what comes from central government. That updated bill is expected in December. So we'll see what lands in that space.
So you'll talk about the implications
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it might be that our policy framework lifts the bar for anything new that might happen. So if the district councils are preparing, designing a new wastewater treatment facility, maybe there's a higher bar, and then our existing facilities have a transitional period over, as they're upgraded for certain things over time, improve their outputs. That's probably a policy approach we're going to need to look through more closely.
So through you, Chair, that there's an important element here, and that there's a potentially could be a one size fits all. So will the one size adequately fit all of us? Maybe the challenge here in terms of the regulations they're looking to put through. So where of that.
Are you going to expand that more, Fred?
So
That was a little bit more
instead of all the councils having individual consent conditions for a similar activity, they can have one shed.
Is that what you're thinking will do?
Oh no, that's what they're going to do. So whether that picks up the different nuances and different regions and different physical environments or cultural environments, that's the question. I mean, we've seen it play out with freshwater, where one size we found didn't fit all well. So there's a one size element in this as well. So we're going to keep an eye on it and report back to you and involve you in that, but just making sure you're aware there's that element here.
So through you, Chair, couple of things. Just one around the consultation with the district councils. Okay, so that'll be individually and then collectively.
Yes, we're looking at whether we tackle it collectively to start with through that group that's already been set up, that's looking at what those 3 water plans are, and then probably dropping down individually into each council, because when we're looking at existing facilities, each council, I guess, is at different stages of infrastructure, and different plans are in their LTPs about certain upgrades and things like that.
Because it just reading all the stuff and the feedback, it throws a whole lot of alarm bells and red flags up, and I guess the discussions that are happening with councils currently regionally, around 2 water sides of things, that has a massive impact on that as well.
Yep, so that's the group that we're probably going to start to tap into in the first instance.
And through you, Chair, the December date is actually a real defining date. Councils of New Plymouth and South Taranaki have made some decisions around what they're looking with their water entities, but it's very hard to make a decision when we actually don't know what the regulation actually looks like to start off with. So yeah, certainly that collective discussion is hugely important, I believe.
Yeah, and we've had feedback from iwi as well, that collective discussion with iwi at the table when we're talking about stormwater wastewater is very important too. So that's why that existing group that's already set up, because it has got our iwi represented on it too, is probably good starting point.
And just lastly, I actually totally agree with what Fred actually had to say around whether one boot fits all. If you just have a look at Taranaki, one boot won't fit all, and that's going to be a real challenge of how it works.
Yeah.
Fred, did I learn something from freshwater?
The short answer is no.
Thank you.
So the other thing we just need to touch base with districts on too is earthworks and septic tanks are 2 things that we both have functions for, either under Building Act or under the RMA. We just need to make sure that our policy framework we're putting in place there doesn't confuse things for our community, and that there's a risk of duplication through that process. Then there's a whole series, I guess, of working groups that we've getting underway with at the moment around some key parts of our future plan. So repair and planting action plans, one that we're wanting to stand up. Earthworks is one that we've got in train at the moment. Some further discussions around animal effluent, and I'll get to some of the detail of these in the next few slides. And like I said before, the fish passage work as well in developing our action plan going forward.
Through the Chair, just ask a question around septic. I talked with Abby before about a concern that I brought up at our audit risk around the Stratford Council just did a septic tank out in the Horizons area at Wangamama. And part of the consenting requirements is the fact that every year we have to submit back to iwi of how it is actually operating, and every 3 years put a camera through and do that. Is that something that's going to be happening here? And the only reason why I ask is the fact that one is that who is the regulatory body that's controlling that, and secondly, that there's a huge amount of incurred cost onto councils and time. And it just worries me that when we do this, or whatever decisions are made around septic tanks and stuff, is that it's made straightforward because that's a real risk for councils and incurred cost.
So I'll talk to the septic tank point now, and then I'll skip over it later on. So the feedback we got on septic tanks when we went out to consultation was mixed. Some people were definitely supportive of us having a stronger control over them, and others thought actually the risk is minimal. I think when we delved into the feedback that we got, there was a strong delineation between people who were really concerned about septic tanks and their management of them when you've got them in urban areas or where there's a township where there's a cumulative effect that potentially could be at play and occurring, and we've seen that play out in Taranaki recently. So what we're going to be looking into in the septic tank framework is whether we actually do need to kind of have that risk-based approach that is set around certain kind of density of septic tanks, slopes, soil types, all of those things which are general important elements to be managing when you're looking at septic tank frameworks. They're seeing whether we actually need to have a difference of policy for when it's a rural kind of feedback we kind of got from people is that, the rural community know they're on septic tanks, they know how to manage them, they know how to upkeep them. If they're not right next to a sensitive receptor, then are we that worried about it? But if you've got a whole township where people may not be aware of septic tank management, there might be a whole lot of, seasonal influx of people visiting those townships, and maybe that's where we need to have a stronger look at. So we haven't got to that level of detail yet that you've just spoken about in terms of recent consenting experience, but that'll all come through the wash when you step into it.
So to respond to your central question, we already have iwi involved in some of our consents here.
Yep.
It's accepted by the applicant. It is reasonable in my view. So we're on that journey as well. Right? So
Yes, as long as it's very transparent, clear.
it is.
Well, then that's fine.
Yep. So it's the regional council is the consent authority. Iwi as Kaitiaki also have input, and reasonable measures are taken to include that input and to move forward.
I guess my only reply to that would be the fact that if there is an issue for the information that's sent back, who is in control of that information? The regulatory body?
The consent authority, the council. The council must remain the consent authority on this.
Even though that information is going back to the...
And if you have consent conditions, you can't give power to third parties. Right? So that condition may be you will share that information with that party, but the party has no power through the consent. Right? So there's not. So it's reasonable. Maybe we talk separately about it.
Yeah.
So just stepping into the next bucket, I guess a couple of slides on our next steps for policy direction. We've kind of touched on this before, but there's ongoing commitment, I guess, to continue to incorporate Mātauranga Māori and Māori as important values through our plan process. There was strong feedback, I think, from Tangata Whenua that the Māori worldview and the holistic approach to freshwater management wasn't clear in our last consultation. I think that's probably fair criticism. I think there is a couple of reasons for probably why that appears to be the case. One, that we were consulting on some quite targeted components of what is the whole body of work that we're doing under freshwater management. But also, I think a lot of the work that we're continuing to do with Maria, our Pattaya officer that we support with Ngāi o Taranaki, is actually delving into that detail. So I think over the next coming months, as we draft up our Māori freshwater values framework and those kind of things with iwi, that will hopefully come more to the fore. But I think it's important to acknowledge that we do have the ongoing commitment for us to keep working in these spaces with iwi. We got some really good feedback from our community around what is working for them in terms of farm practices across Taranaki and what's not, so what they've tried and it's not quite worked out. We're now working through all of that feedback to really try and identify where we've got activities or practices that we're quite concerned about from a risk perspective, and trying to see what are those mitigation methods that our farming community in particular are already kind of using to try and mitigate those effects. And as I said before, this is quite an important part in the process because then that feeds into our science as well as to whether we need to start testing some of those mitigations that we haven't yet tested to determine whether there's, you know, certain contaminant load reductions and things like that that we might be able to achieve by asking for embedding some of that good management practices into our policy framework. So we're looking at all of those things as we're doing that. So as I said, identifying those high risk activities and looking at what management options are available to us in Taranaki, looking at contaminant load reductions, how easy it might be for some of those management approaches to be implemented, and then also that implementation timeframe from a perspective of how long does it take for some of those mitigations to actually become fully functioning and having that role of mitigating effects, and what's the lag time to when we might see some of those improvements coming through in our freshwater quality. There was a whole heap of things that we received commentary on that we didn't actually go out to consultation on, and this is, I guess, like I said before, a reflection of the fact that we were actually consulting on quite a small part of what will be the overall plan, but I just thought it'd be worthwhile flagging this to everybody that these are on the table and we are working through these already, but they were specifically requested from our community to make sure we're addressing them too. So as I said before, where we can, we're looking at that catchment lens and setting policy direction. The outstanding water bodies, we're looking at setting the criteria to identify outstanding water bodies and then a framework of protection and management of their values. We currently have 3 in our current plans. Our intention is to carry those 3 through. There's one that was an additional one that was consulted on a few years ago, which we might add to that bundle as well. But the important thing being that our plan will have an updated set of criteria that can be used on future investigations around whether we ever feel that we've got other bodies that need to be pulled into the plan as outstanding water bodies. We're looking to develop a groundwater framework that deals, I guess, with 2 aspects, one around groundwater quantity management, and then also one around managing land use and impacts on groundwater quality. So making sure that, an example, if we are encouraging all dairy effluent to be going to land, that we're making sure that that land use management change isn't having an impact on our groundwater quality. Looking to introduce water source protection zones that will be protected and managed from adverse effects. So this is where our district councils take their water and making sure we've got the right protection around where they're taking water from, any activities that might be causing concerns. We're looking at developing receiving water quality standards. So this is receiving water quality standards that may include end of pipe standards, application of action zones, and managing cumulative effects. So we're looking at doing that work. We are doing that work as we speak. Obviously, we need to have a suite of oil and gas provisions as well. We didn't consult on oil and gas industry specifically in the last consultation, but that will be a key component of the plan. And as I mentioned before, in response to your question, Liam, around freshwater farm plans, is that we are still continuing to look at and investigate to make sure that we are, keeping that door open for when those regulations land, that we are providing an opportunity for activities that perhaps can be done through that rather than the consenting process.
Question around the outstanding water bodies.
Yes.
So I know that includes the development of the framework for future inclusion. But what about, so I know, for example, if we include the 3 northern Taranaki, Ngāti Tama, Ngāti Maru, and Ngāti Mutunga, that there's only 2 catchments that are monitored. And for example, Ngāti Mutunga doesn't have any catchments that are monitored, so it's difficult for us to be able to feedback into the limits around that. Is there going to be a process for inclusion of other water bodies?
Possibly not through this plan process, but the idea of us setting a really clear set of identification criteria is that work can be something that council can pick up and to inform a future plan change in the future. What will come along with that set of identification criteria is, like, what is it that we're actually trying to protect with these outstanding water bodies? So, at the moment, the Hangatahua is one of ours, and it's got really strong protections on water takes and things like that. So we need to make sure that the intent of the outstanding water bodies is protecting the cream of the crop, because you're quite restrictive on the policy framework you apply to them. My feeling is because we're lifting the bar, I suppose, as to how we're managing all freshwater in Taranaki, that should still apply, that we are really looking at those really important outstanding water bodies, rather than it being something that ends up being applied across the whole region. We need to be quite careful about what we're putting into that. process. But we are working through that identification criteria at the moment, and that'll be a key point of consultation, I think, in particular with iwi, around how that works for cultural values too.
And through you, Mr. Chair, your CE has informed us around the financial pressures that we all face. So this is a matter that like the cost of running another hydrologic site and water quality site are significant. So all the decisions we're making are within that framework.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, reconciling a network and making sure we're filling some of those gaps is something that team's looking at the moment. So you can expect to have some contact with us shortly to talk
about. The other area that I wanted to bring to your attention is the continued management of intensification. So the aim of this approach was, I think, supported by many in the community, in that the reason why we want to look at whether we can manage future intensification is because we don't want to be asking action of our existing community to seek improvement for that to be underdone because we haven't had our eye on the ball about intensification occurring elsewhere in the region. That being said, it's quite a complex policy framework that we do need to step through, because rightly so, a number of our farming community and industry also have concerns about that approach because they don't want it to stifle innovation or even to stifle things that people might want to try to see freshwater improvements as well. So we have to step through this process quite carefully. But as a reminder, we do obviously have currently the NES, a blanket rule that applies across the whole country around managing future intensifications. Any future intensification must be a consented process. The government has in the last week announced that they're not going to extend that clause, so that has got a sunset clause of next year on it. So we will have a policy gap of managing future intensification when that falls away. So that's what we're trying to look at from this perspective. I think it's probably important to note that we are going to continue to explore those different policy options. Stocking rates as a proxy for managing further intensification did come under quite a lot of scrutiny through the consultation process, and we're probably not going to step into that space this time around with the plan. There's a lot of uncertainty around that rule and information requirements around demonstrating that real causal link of what is that perfect stocking rate, and it often quite is different from one farm to another. So that's not probably something we're not going to progress, but we are still looking to manage future intensification going forward in this plan. Important to note though too is that this is about managing future intensification. It's not about managing the existing intensification that we have, and we did have a lot of feedback from the community. Parts of our community feel that Taranaki is too intensified now in terms of the land use that we have, but we're not looking to stepping into that. We are just really trying to hold the line, I suppose, so that any improvements we do ask for people to make, they're not going to be undone without us having an eye on the ball of what the impact could be of that in further intensification. Water allocation, we went out with 5 different scenarios to the community on water allocation. We identified our preferred being number 3, which promotes a 90% species protection and maintains reliability between 85 and 98% prior to adding in climate change predictions, because that does change things a little bit. But this was largely supported, that scenario 3, by the community. I will note though that this is a point of difference with Tangata Whenua here, because Tangata Whenua were quite keen to see a scenario that's protected 100% of species protection being what we looked at for water allocation. We've not progressed that. We're going to progress at this stage with the 90% and further investigate how that plays out, I guess, when we're thinking about over allocation of efficiency requirement, groundwater allocation opportunities, and also then look at whether there's anything we can do for this round of the plan change for cultural flow opportunities. So where can we bring in into the water allocation framework that cultural values piece? So how does a flow affect things like Mahinga Kai and those kind of elements through that process? The advice from our expert, I guess, in this space around that 100% versus 90% species protection is that 10% species lost is minimal effect, I think is the words that that he has used. So, and obviously 100% species protection really does mean that you don't really have any water allocation available for use. So it is something we've got to balance here around allowing water allocation to occur, but in a managed way, we're protecting those values. So we're going to start stepping through the policy framework that supports that and the over allocation, because scenario 3 does present us with over allocation issues in Taranaki that we're going to have to deal with that. Animal effluent, we consulted on 3 options here, which was no transition in terms of getting animal effluent out of discharging to water and to land, no transition, a staged transition or bespoke transition. Important to note that all of our existing consents that currently discharge to water or have dual consent all expire by 2033. Most of the feedback we received supported the staged transition, and what we mean by staged transition is when this plan is notified, if we're on track with the notification next year, we might have a staged transition of people's consents that expire within 3 years of that notification. If they need to, can apply for a consent to get a short-term consent to continue to discharge to water, but they don't need to be demonstrating why they need them. I guess that's probably an infrastructure planning kind of process probably that sits behind that, enabling them to do it. Anybody who's sitting at beyond that 3-year kind of period that we might put, they don't get the opportunity to have that additional consent. It's more you're being given that notice, I suppose, of the plan being notified, say in 2025, and if your consent expires in 2029 or 2030, you've been given a few years' notice that you're not going to be able to get consent to renew to continue to go to water. Importantly to note, obviously, this approach is supported by industry, in particular Fonterra, who are already pushing people to discharge to land by next year anyway. This is a point of difference again with Tangata Whenua, though. Tangata Whenua were quite keen to see the no transition be approached. So basically, if somebody's consent expires in 2026 after the plan's notified, then they wouldn't get that opportunity to step through if they needed to have a little bit more time to make that transition. We're also going to look into an option around the bespoke, which is the individual transition to phase out. And this came from a lot of commentary from the community. I guess there might be certain farms in our region that particularly that might have high rainfall or high altitude, who may struggle to be able to get their discharges out of water and to land for a whole number of reasons. So we're looking at whether we're going to be working with industry in that community about whether there is a really tight policy framework that we maybe need to create to enable them to access a short-term consent to, again, either plan for that change of infrastructure or to actually plan for a change of land use, because perhaps dairy farming in those areas is a little bit tricky to continue to do under those expectations we have for dairy effluent management. We also consulted on the application of the Dairy Effluent Storage Calculator, which is Dairy NZ calculator that enables people to have a look at whether their effluent ponds are the right size. That was well supported by the community generally, although there were some challenges, I think, about how people have been able to implement that. There's been mixed experience, I suppose, as to how successful that's been. And some of that might be on whether people feel that they need to rely on an expert to help them do that, or whether it's something they can do themselves. So we're going to work with Dairy NZ around how that might best be supported in our region to be applied, as is the Dairy NZ WAF process that they have around their assessments of existing effluent ponds. And there was pretty strong feedback, I guess, from particularly the piggery industry around just making sure they're supportive of right size calculations for storage ponds, but just making sure that they don't get caught up in something that might be too onerous for them as a piggery versus a dairy practice.
What was it? Pigs?
Pardon?
Pigs.
Pigs, yeah. So we just need to make sure that we've got the right framework for the right land use going forward. We also consulted on whether we should provide a permitted pathway for really small dairy effluent charges, as long as they're under 35 metres cubes a year. And if that discharge is going to land, rather than making those really small instances go through a whole consenting process, maybe the risk is actually quite small, and we should be allowing those kind of things to go through for permitted. That's things like, the deer industry, and that might have their animals on hard stands when they velt them or things like that. And if those kind of industries or practices become a little bit more common in Taranaki, we're looking at providing that permitted pathway for those small, low-risk effluent discharges. So we did get support for that policy direction to continue to take. Just covering off on the last couple of ones before I jump into science. Stormwater and wastewater I spoke earlier. We've got a lot of work to do with districts broadly, but there were some discrete components of both stormwater and wastewater that we feel like we can progress our policy framework. I've already touched on that wastewater one around looking at what we do, septic tanks, rural versus urban. And then from a stormwater perspective, we did talk to the community around small scale trade, industrial premises, being managed by contaminant risk rather than site size. At the moment, our current plan manages those by site size rather than what you're actually doing on your site and whether there's a contaminant risk there or not from a stormwater perspective. So the community were pretty supportive of that approach, so we're going to investigate that as a policy direction going forward. Earthworks was a part of the consultation that was really hotly discussed within our community. So I think there's general support that is a space that we should be managing and a risk-based approach applying to that. But some of the parameters that we had in that that we went out to consultation on were just not going to work, particularly for our rural communities. So we're going to proceed with the policy framework to manage earthworks, but we are looking at, I guess, the criteria around what we're managing to make sure that we provide a framework that gets those environmental outcomes that we're trying to seek from a sediment and erosion control perspective, but that also is workable for our community. So things like looking at that threshold of 2,500 rural community, we really considered that wasn't going to work for them. Looking at whether there's some rural earthwork activities that maybe are exempt from that rural framework, looking at the impact of depth, volume, slope on those things, and importantly from Tangata Whenua was really making sure that we provide the right pathway for Waihi Tapu sites being considered and managed appropriately where any earthworks is occurring regardless of scale. So we're working through that at the moment. Like I said before, we're trying to set up a small working group at the moment of some community and industry people in that space to try and get some feedback, I guess, is what's going to work for Taranaki. And fish passage, I think what became evident in fish passage is the community do need a lot of support in this space. I think a lot of that support probably sits in some non-regulatory guidance, education kind of area. But from a plan making perspective, we're quite keen to make sure that we progress with our framework that really does provide remediation opportunity, provides for remediation in the easiest way possible, so that the plan's not the reason why people aren't remediating fish passage. At the moment, we've got some challenges, I think, with some of our structures, rules in our plan that are a little bit onerous for those purposes. So we're looking to step through and improve that. And then lastly, science investigations. As I said before, and Abby just touched on it just then, we are reviewing our existing monitoring network, and there will be conversations with iwi in particular around that. We've got Matanga Māori advisor part-time at the moment, Abby, that's for Fern's going to be working through that with iwi. So that will be work that's about to kick off. There's a whole heap of work, I think, in progressing those target attribute state investigations that I've touched on previously. So looking at whether there's additional mitigations we need to build into those investigations that we didn't test last time to see whether we've got those targets sitting in the right place. We've got to do some more work around nutrient criteria development, and just, signalling, I guess, that the government has kind of flagged there's components of NOF that are likely to change under any new MPS from the government, and I probably think E. coli is one of them. So our team is just looking at what the alternative criteria might be if we're not going to be looking at the 95th percentile, just to see how we stack up as a region then against bottom lines and things like that if we're not using that metric specifically. There's a whole heap of remaining attributes that are still in the MPS that we haven't progressed yet to the point of target attribute state. There's likely to be some that we'll bring back to you as well that we're not going to propose to progress this round of plan development. So that's probably a paper that you'll get at the next committee round, where we just don't feel like either they're attributes that will add particular value to us, or where we may not have enough information to be able to set baselines and things like that at this stage in time. And then climate change considerations. As I said before, we're already building in climate change considerations into all of our science work, but I don't think we've probably been clear enough in having or expressing those considerations to our community. I think sometimes they're a bit buried, so we can get a bit better at comms around how those climate change considerations are influencing the work that we're doing. And that's it. Yes. So that's a really whirlwind trip, I guess, of a report that now that this has been through the committee, assuming you're comfortable with the resolutions we've put in front of you, we will release this to the community and an email will be sent to everybody who did participate in that process that we've got the contact details for so that they know that it exists. And as I said, there's some really good detail in here around helping us refine policy developments, and the team's now starting to work through that and all of those next steps I just went through.
Further evidence of the value of that broad and thorough community consultation that you guys did, and well done on bringing it all together and shaping some policy direction. That's an enormous body of work from the bit that we can see. It's mind-boggling, really. So, keep it up and well done, and thank you very much to you and the staff.
Just,
Charlie.
can I say also, fantastic. It looks huge. As a sort of non-expert in this area, just thinking about that review process and concerns raised about the review process, and I presume that was around the coalition government's policy framework. And it seems to me that you're pretty confident to keep going. We're pretty confident to keep going because there are signals coming from central government. What in your mind, are there some significant risks we should be thinking about in terms of what we're doing and what finally comes from central government?
Through you, Chair, I think some of the risks I've had flags. I think the wastewater area is probably one that's clear. I think the NOF framework will change under the new MPSFM. Whether that changes completely though, because Abby probably can better speak to the amount of effort and agreed science across the country that went into the development of NOF, and that was industry as well. That wasn't just science that went into the development of the NOF framework in itself. I guess what I'm hopeful of is that the MPS will remove a lot of the musts that sit. It's quite a prescriptive MPS at the moment around process that councils must follow. I guess the approach we've taken is to hone in on those attributes and those things that are of a concern for Taranaki, and to really try and find management approaches through that. So I hope that that kind of flexibility comes in the new MPS.
Unlikely to be a clash.
I think, well, I guess the government has said that they're still keen to see freshwater quality improve, and I guess that's what our framework is designed to do, and what our new freshwater plan will continue to focus on is halting the degradation we have seen in some parts of our region, and to seek improvement over time with our community in a way that can be implemented.
So members will recall, and Lisa noted it before, mid next year we're going to pause and review our position. So all these matters will come to the fore, and you'll be able to make an informed decision about the plan and the rate of planning.
I think we're likely to get an indication from the government earlier than that. Like, I think that there's kind of signalling that the end of the year, early next year, will be when they'll release their whole package of national direction. So it won't just be on freshwater, it'll be on everything. So that'll be a point, I guess, that we'll stop and have a look at, just to see whether we're still in track or online with or not.
I'll just jump up there to Benita.
Kia ora team. Wow, mind-boggling the amount of work that's gone on there. Congratulations to you all, and thank you for the work. Just one of the things that jumped out at me was talking about the potential transition from farmland and some of those hinterlands that may no longer meet the standard or be useful as productive farmland. Transition to what? Is there any sort of indication what the options may be? Because automatically my mind goes to potentially forestry, and we know that there are also challenges with that industry around, aside from the land use, the potential for the waterways as we've seen on the East Coast. So yeah, any sort of indications what they may transition to if there is such a need?
Through Chair, give me 2 seconds, because we did ask a question around diversification when we went out to consultation, because we did want to get a steer from the community as to what's already being trialled or where there might be interest in moving to.
Right.
And not surprisingly, I guess, and this was the question was specifically, are there any that you have, considered? And then the next follow-up question, implemented. So there's a lot that people have been considering and not necessarily implementing. I'd say that to start with, but forestry and horticulture were the two things which were flagged as alternate land uses that people have either considered or have actually implemented, away from, I guess, your more traditional dairying or beef and sheep farming. Sheep dairying and poultry were the next two, which were kind of relevant to one another. And then deer farming was another one. So what we're trying to look at, and the reason why we asked those questions of the community was just to see, because you're right, Anita, that we do need to manage effects, future effects on any land use that we do see changes to. So we do want to get a bit of a steer for where those pressures might come from, and then think about what we might need to do to make sure that we're not, creating a new problem.
Yeah, and again, it would be wonderful if the powers that be saw the value in supporting, reforestation with native species and things like that, especially in those highlands where we see the downflow through our waterways. So thanks, Lisa. That's awesome.
Thank you. Just keep moving around, Grant.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to echo your comments just before around the roadshows. Just the feedback that I received, that it was really, really well done and really appreciated. And there was a lot of learnings that came from that as well. Probably for staff and management on picking, but also for a lot of farmers. And there were some that I talked to that hadn't realised some of the issues that were happening and learned a hell of a lot more. So absolutely, I think that's fantastic. And Fred just mentioned before about basically stopping and taking a breath. I think that's really important for everyone in Taranaki, because there's a lot that's been happening. And people are really, really concerned and very anxious, and you probably got that from the feedback, obviously. But well done. I thought that's probably the best roadshows and turnouts that I've seen from TRC. So well done.
Okay.
And mine was what really become clear was that need for education, and I think freshwater farm plans are great for that one-on-one education, but also even septic tanks. There's a lot needed, isn't it? And it's a journey for people to start to understand. And I think the start of that journey was that consultation for a number of people. There's probably more, but that was the main one that we really can't underestimate enough, the education piece.
Charlotte. Just reiterate the comments on the amazing amount of work done, and also fully endorse the directions the officer taking. I think you've done a really good job of finding that balance between different parts of the community, and that's a very hard call to make. Just a sense check question, which you probably can't answer, but I'll ask anyway. So when this gets notified, it goes to the Freshwater Commissioner. What are the most vulnerable areas you think in our plan as we're developing that the Freshwater Commissioner might test or challenge? Where are we vulnerable in the sense of that one? Probably can't answer it, but I thought.
Or is it too early to answer?
Too early, yeah. I know it's subject to who appeals it, all those kind of things.
Yeah. It's probably too early to kind of really give a clear answer on that. I think generally, our investigations in science always come under a bit of review. Everybody does, every regional council. If you look at any freshwater hearing, there's only been a couple, but even just general hearing processes that have occurred in any kind of regional plan development over the last few years, is the science always does get strongly reviewed, I would say, from industry bodies in particular. And I think there's probably some land use areas like forestry and things like that that will take quite strongly to any stringency, I guess, that a plan might put through, although those kind of those land uses are covered by environmental standards anyway now. It's the central government model. So we're constrained as to how much we can do there anyway. It's probably the rate of change, I think, from a community perspective that we're going to really need to focus on to make sure that the change that we're asking of people is change that can be implemented.
Okay.
You, Chair, this wasn't just Lisa and her small team, it was also the science, Abby's science team. So they were both out there communicating with the public, so it was a real team effort.
And just to back up my commentary on science too, that's not to say that our science is not good, because we have had some really strong feedback from from consultants and others about the quality of work our science team are doing at the moment. So we're very lucky to have them.
Yeah, well done to everyone. Yes.
Just in that report, I got the sense that people wanted to make sure we took our time and did it well. Is that a fair comment?
I think that sits behind the questioning of where the government's heading and where TRC's program lines up.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, great report. I really enjoyed reading all 200 pages of it. I really do love, on a personal level, understanding different viewpoints and how different people come to conclusions, and just the vastness that sits out there in our community. And I think there's so much richness out there of what we can do as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where some of the trepidation around just forging ahead with making a new plan sort of comes from the Federated Farmers perspective. It's just how much we can achieve as a community without rules, and just how much beauty there is out there, and you can just see it in that report. And we know how much is missing, because we know people don't turn up and they don't say their views, especially people who might not agree. And I think that can be harder to express, or if you've had trouble. But I do think it's really rich and really amazing, and I do really, I do endorse your steps as a Federated Farmers representative, cautious around proceeding with making a new plan, but absolutely there's so much we can achieve as a community. And I think that's really highlighted in the report and in the steps that you're looking to take. And I just really endorse particularly all those action groups that you're looking to put out there, and they're really amazing. And I really love Tangata Whenua's impetus on making sure we've got a good catchment lens and how much we can achieve together. I think was really impressive. The other thing that I thought, that just sitting here, and that didn't come through in the feedback, but the stuff around intensification, just how much industry can help guide how those things look, and just how much information sits out there around management practices, to have a place to really talk to the community. It's your
Thank you. I'd just like to thank acknowledge all the members of this committee, all of you who are here and those who aren't here as well. You've all been just so engaged in this process. You've asked really good questions, and you've given such good feedback all the way through, and today also. So thank you all as well. Excellent. So great team and great teamwork. And I think that brings us to a close. We have recommendations on page 84, 85A, all the way through to F. I have a mover, please.
Yep.
Thanks, Susan. Linda. Thanks, Donna. All those in favour, please. Aye.
Aye.
Against? There are none. Our next meeting will be November 26th. Probably our last one. Yeah. That's the close. Okay, so I think we better do a karakia for close meeting. All good? Okay. I can tuck it down.
Are we doing kia?
Just reading my thing. Am I?
Kia.
And
My daughter just cringes at my
Your
pronunciation.
Victoria.